Good morning. We're back with our series of barges along the Seine River, and today I'm talking more specifically about tonal values, being able to read them from your motif, being able to state them accurately, and also being able to manipulate them for effect. This is the scene we've been painting. Backdrop of Paris, the Pont Neuf, a barge on the Seine, and some figures coming towards us. If you squint your eyes looking at this photo, you can see how closely related the backdrop, the bridge, the barge, and even the river are in tonal value. And that's how I developed this sketch. I really worked to make the city, the bridge, the Seine itself, and the barge is pretty close in tonal value. You did use some darks in the barge to pull it forward, and then I left the walkway very bright and made the sky slightly closer in tonality to the distant city. And that was a manipulation. I wanted to make the walkway very bright and the figures that are on the walkway very dark to gain more interest in what the figures are doing, how they're walking towards us, and make that the center point or the focal point of my painting. You see me starting in the same way with the burnt sienna and very highly diluted, stating the big shapes first of the walkway, the bridge, and even up into the sky, burnt sienna into the sky. While that sky is wet, however, I'm dropping in a good amount of cobalt blue, and you can see it drifting downward, giving us a little bit of a transition in the sky from a bluer aspect to a warmer aspect. And this will be repeated in some of the other shapes. Establishing the big shape of the bridge, we have a little different perspective again in this painting, and the bridge is a little more of an important element, at least as a shape, but it will merge with some of the local shapes as the painting develops. Now you see me applying more cobalt blue into that wet burnt sienna. The edge along the top of the bridge is quite soft, quite nice. But I'm trying to use two colors for effect here, and both are holding the painting together in terms of color. And actually, it's a great exercise for developing a motif, is to work in two colors. Limit your palette to two colors with some accent colors. This allows you to focus more on lights and darks and shapes and contrast and establishing a center of interest. There's a big problem with trying to match color too closely as you're painting your subject. This is because, number one, with watercolor, it's nearly impossible. And number two, it slows down the process to where you have to sacrifice the beauty of a wet-on-wet wash because you're really trying to match the color. By using these two colors, I can put more of my attention on establishing the values, relationships, lights and darks to each other, and also be aware of how they establish depth and mood in the painting. Well, I finished the bridge. I've put some of the public lighting up on top, and it's an extension of that tonal value into the sky, and it's given me a nice effect up there. So I have sort of a feeling already about the sort of atmosphere I want to create. I've moved on to the barge, one of the darker elements in the painting, using, again, burnt sienna and cobalt blue to create the whole barge. Some places you see more burnt sienna, other places you'll see more blue. And these two colors, since they're cool and warm, they play off of each other. They create contrast and they create tension simply because of their cool property or warm property. When they're layered on top of each other, they create an interesting effect too. You can see that light brown kind of glowing beneath the blue. I'm extending the barge into the cast shadow, which is moving over the foreground, giving us a clear impression of where the sun is coming from, behind and left, and casting some beautiful shadows across the pavement. Shadows, yes, but these are an extension of the dark that was painted in the barge, and they also help to connect the painting left to right. So they're more than just shadows. They're ways of connecting my painting. And the more of this that you do, the more designing that you do, you'll find that you think of objects beyond what they are. That's not just a boat. These aren't just people, but these are a way of kind of creating a variety in darks and connecting darks and giving your painting a sort of strength. Okay, so the foreground is pretty much established. The placement of figures, you saw me putting in a few blobs. That's all they are at this point. I'll develop them later in the painting with detail. And now I can return to paint the backdrop against the sky, which is dried. I'm using the same two hues of burnt sienna and cobalt blue. And I'm enjoying the rooftops, as you can tell, establishing the basic building and then extending the tone up into the roof. And that's one of the features of Paris that's, to me, very interesting, is the chimney pots, the rooftops, the cathedrals, which I'm painting now. It creates such a variety of shape and nuance to the skyline. And more blue on top of that burnt sienna. Stopping just at the bridge, and then I felt the first wash that I had applied was too light for, it had dried too light. It may have looked good at one time, but as it dried, I felt a little too light. So I'm returning to that wash. It's dried, and I'm matching it more closely to the backdrop and also to the barge, applying a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit more of that cobalt blue. And what's kind of appearing right now is the Seine River behind the barge. I'm going to address that as well with placing some blue and into the Seine itself, and kind of merging it or wetting it to the barge so that the whole left side is going to have a more unified feel to it. Yeah, and I can also build up some of the dark elements in the barge. I'm placing just a little bit of some really strong color to the back of the barge to see if I can pull it forward. What I'm doing now with the brush is I'm addressing the foreground. There's a very interesting texture or pattern to the walkway that moves under the bridges along the Seine River. It's made up of pavers of a kind of random size and placement, and that's what I'm trying to emulate with what we call dry brush. The paper is very dry, and with burnt sienna, I'm kind of flicking my brush back and forth diagonally to create the little highlights that we see on the pavers. And that contrast gets darker as it comes closer to us, and it helps to, again, establish a feeling of the direction of the light. At this stage, it's interesting to note how the bridge seems to extend into the figures and connect with the barge. This sort of connection, again, is something that's going to build strength into the final painting. And so I allow it to, or I want it to be readable in this way at this stage. I want to see the connections. I can easily pull those figures out of that pillar of the bridge, and make them stand out more. And I'll do that later with some color and some white. Some richer darks into the barge, and now I'm painting the masts. I just find it masts in some of the rigging, these fine lines that come from above the painting and find their way down to the barge. I'm painting it in a way that's more comfortable. I tilt the paper and I can drag my hand across the dry paper and paint these with a little more ease than doing it straight up and down. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm now going to finalize some of the passages and the figures. Again, highlights on the shoulders, some color work to the figures, a bright red here and there. I know I said it was going to be a 2-color painting, but some of these color accents are fun to place. And if the surrounding painting is built up of 2 colors, a little flash of green or a little flash of red can really stand out and pull the eye towards it. So the painting is assuming the atmosphere. It's assuming a finished look. I'm going to put in some more shadows and some highlights here and there with the white to get just break up the big dark shapes. But they're really finishing touches to a foundation that's already established. And the warm atmosphere that's coming out of this is quite pleasing. I feel I was true to the sketch that I started, and simplifying and joining a lot of the tones that were similar in the image source. And I found the big mid value, which is basically an extension of the tones in the backdrop buildings, through the bridge, even through the barge. Isolated the light value, which is the walkway going back, and used some real strong darks in that light area to gain a sense of focus. In this grayscale version, I believe you can see more clearly how that big mid value isolates the light area of the walkway and allows us to see the walkway with more clarity and the figures along the walkway. So this has been an exercise in looking at your subject in terms of tonal values, and especially in searching out a large mid value.